Hi, I'm Theo, and these broadcasts are to support the blogs on nomorec.com's website as well as the online classes. In this episode, part 1 of the Most High series. Welcome back to the No More Sea broadcast. We want to start by talking about the Most High in this episode, and we've been dealing with this phrase a lot. And it's behind what we said in Elohim, and it's behind what we said about divine counsel. And again, some of the pushback that often people give is Elohim only means capital G-O-D, the Israelite God. We have proven that is not true in the Hebrew Scriptures. We have gone carefully through to see. Secondly, there's only one verse on the divine counsel, and yet we have this phraseology about the Most High. Last time we were in Psalm 82, where God as Elohim was sitting with his divine counsel in court, judging other Elohim. And so you have the idea that you have the Elohim, Yahweh, is in counsel with his other Elohim, who are the witnesses that form the divine court. So it's a divine courtroom scene where the others are gathered, and I would suggest you look, and maybe we will in future episodes, at Daniel chapter 7, where there's thrones gathered, and the idea that you see in the New Testament where Paul says that believers will judge angels, and Jesus mentions, lots of talk about the disciples on their thrones, and Revelation and the 24 and all that can be looked at. But anyway, we have a divine courtroom scene where we have God among his Elohim judging some bad Elohim because they have chosen, along with their human counterparts, to rule unjustly and are not following the decrees of the divine council, and therefore become judged to the point that they're going to die like men and be replaced. So we want to get into, in future episodes, more of that replacement, who replaces them and how, and you can obviously follow that. And so, but here we have in verse 6, I said you are gods, you are Elohim, that's what you're supposed to be. That's what you were created to be. That's what you're supposed to be, but you're not. And you are supposed to be sons, loyal sons of the Most High. And you can think about all the rebellions that occur throughout the Bible. The kings, especially in the northern kingdom, there's many rebellions as leaders are replaced, because when leaders become unjust and then justice is not seen in the land, then things go crazy and chaotic, and we get constantly change of power. I know in Nepal, there's been lots of chaos since they deposed the king and tried to establish something else, and they've gotten a constitution, and they've tried to have a stable government. It has not been successful as of yet. It's just a time of chaos. There's no peace. Again, going back to our Douglas Knight quote on cosmology. And so, even in David's house, you saw this, right? David's house, and who was supposed to be the next king under David, and David himself took over for Saul. And so you see this idea, and you're supposed to have loyal sons. We saw that in Joseph, right? The 12 sons of Jacob, and how Joseph replaces as firstborn, but he was the one that Jacob wanted, the one whom Israel loved, but by the law, it was supposed to be Reuben, but then through a series of events, Reuben's displaced by Joseph, because Reuben and the others proved that they're unfaithful. And so they're supposed to be loyal sons of the Most High, all of you. So this idea of Most High means that Yahweh is species unique. There's no one incomparable, no one like Yahweh among all Elohim, just like there's no other human like Jesus. He's fully God, he's fully human, and he's fully something else. And yet we are supposed to participate in his kingdom. We're supposed to become like him as much as we can, even in our humanity. And we are supposed to be born again, born from above, sons of the Most High ourselves. So you have this phraseology, the Most High, obviously, and he is high, most high, supreme being of other beings who are in this council, and some of them end up being rebellious. All of you, this is what you're supposed to be. And they were judged. That's what I intended when I created you, but something else happened, and now we have to do something else because of that. Continuing on in Psalm 97, which we spent some time in previously, we'll look at verse 9 this time. For you, O Lord, are most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. This idea that there are those beings in the Canaanite understanding, more so than the Mesopotamian, but the Canaanite system of governance of the divine council. Within that context, you have a 3 or 4 tiered system that the biblical authors tend to reflect that, as opposed to the Mesopotamian system that's only maybe 2 levels or so. And, Yahweh is Elyon. He's the Most High over all the earth. So he's over all the earth and over all. Remember, he's Lord of the spirits. We talked about that, Lord of spirits. But he's also Lord of human spirits. We talked about that as well. So, going back to Deuteronomy 10:17, he's God of gods, Lord of lords, King of kings. He's King of all gods. You are exalted far above all gods. So he's over all the earth, sovereign, the supreme being, and he's over all gods. And those gods are tied to geographical principalities on the earth in the biblical understanding, as well as, the systems that are of the neighboring nations, including the Greeks to some extent, as you can study out, and we may get to on this channel in future episodes, depending on where we go and the time, because there's so much information here. This is so vast, and yet I'm told all the time that there's just one verse in the Bible about this. Which verse have we presented here that you're talking about is the single verse about the divine council? Psalm 47:2 says, For the Lord, the Most High, is to be feared, a great king over all the earth. Again, he's King of all kings, God of all gods, Lord of lords. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17, which the New Testament writers pick up and apply these titles to Jesus Christ in the same sense. This is where the biblical writers are getting their understanding, and where the biblical authors in the New Testament, where they're quoting their source material from, is from the Old Testament, from the hymn books, the songs that they sing during their festivals, during their worship gathering times. Their songs are full of theology. Yahweh is the Most High, and King over all the earth, and God of all, exalted. He's exalted above all other gods. Now, this interesting passage in Isaiah 14 that we can get to in future episodes, maybe, but obviously there's those of you who are familiar with Dr. Heiser's work. Keener has written on this. So many people have dealt with Isaiah 14, but anyway, just in context of this episode on the Most High, we have said that you said in your heart, speaking to this rebellious being, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. We haven't even begun to talk about how the ancient audience and the biblical writers address stars, and these are God's stars. Okay, and what that means, and how in the ancient world these were understood to be divine beings, and God uses them when he controls time and sets up the festivals, which are supposed to be maintenance to keep his people, his children, his offspring, his creations rightly aligned with him and with each other through their ritual festivals. Anyway, from the beginning in Genesis chapter 1, the stars. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly. This is this rebellious being typifying another rebellious being where he's going to be the Most High. Why? Because he's going to set up his throne on high. Interesting. There's lots of talk about thrones. And if you don't understand the ancient concept of a throne, you're going to not understand the fullness of the message that's coming across in stereo, 3D or whatever. And going to a movie and seeing it in 3D or IMAX or something, you're missing a lot of the extra beauty that's underlying all of these. And we're not going to get into all these necessarily, obviously, in this episode. We're just kind of teasing them in possible future episodes. But we have throne language on high. And the Mount of Assembly, there's the divine council, just like the Greek gods meet on Mount Olympus. The idea that where are gods? Well, gods are up in the skies, in the heavens. And if they were to come down to the earth, where would they touch first? Well, they would touch where the land, the earth, and the sky meets on the horizon. And when you look up and you look across the horizon and you see what? You see a mountain. And a mountain is the highest point of reference that you can see that touches the skies in the ancient world. And so many of these places aren't that high, but some of them are, and some of them are quite treacherous. And, the highest mountain peaks in the world are in the Himalayas in Nepal, Mount Everest, and you cannot live up there. You can only briefly visit there with oxygen tanks, and it's extremely difficult to get there. It takes the best of humans who've trained with the best training to possibly climb these high elevations, and they cannot live there. They can only briefly stay there because they require oxygen tanks. So this is in the ancient world, is who's up there on these mountains? Well, the gods are, because no one else can live up there. And so you have this idea in so many different traditions in the ancient world where the gods dwell on the mountains. They're assembled up there because that's where they first are. And the idea of the ziggurat, where humans make their own mountains as a way for the gods then to step out of heaven, step on the earth, and then walk down the staircase, so to speak, of their man-made mountain and walk inside their temple and take up residence in that temple, and their spirit to come inside that idol. And it's interesting that a ziggurat is huge, much like the pyramids in Egypt, but they're made simply to be mountains. There's nothing inside them. Like in the Egyptian understanding, there's nothing inside a ziggurat. The sole purpose of a ziggurat was to build a man-made mountain in hopes that the god would come down and dwell inside the temple, visit the temple, and thus visit the people, and thus somehow I'm going to be hospitable to the God, and therefore if the God chooses to come down and stay at my house in my temple and receive my hospitality, then perhaps I can somehow influence that God to return the favor and reciprocate in some means and bless me or do something that I want. And so it's this idea that I can invite the God to come down, and I just make the way, because I build this huge monument, not to the God, but for the God to make the egress down, to come inside my temple and to habit inside my idol, that presence, and then can receive my hospitality. But because the God receives my hospitality, the deity then in turn will offer some sort of blessing in return, and that's the idea. So, again, sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly. Who sits enthroned? The God of gods, the Lord of lords, the King of all the earth. In the far reaches of the north. Now, there's the famous phrase, north is Siphon, and it refers in the ancient world to Mount Hermon and to the heights of Mount Hermon, and far to the north was Siphon, where again, this gateway between the gods above and even the gods below existed in Siphon in the north. And it was the gateway between heaven and earth and the underworld, so to speak, Siphon. So that's what's behind this term north. We can spend more time there in future episodes. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. Remember, it's above the heights of the clouds. The clouds are simply envisioned in the ancient world like chariots that the gods ride upon. They travel upon the clouds. And when the clouds come together and fight in battle, then they cast the lightning bolts at each other. That's the ancient understanding here. This is the context. I will make myself like the Most High. Okay, I'm going to show you that I can sit in his seat. I'm going to be like him. But this is in the same sense of what happens, interestingly, back in Genesis chapter 3, when the serpent offers to Adam and Eve for them to be like God prematurely, okay, by eating of the fruit that God had said it's not time for you to eat. I will let you know when and if you can eat of this tree. For now you cannot. For now you just need to be as I have commanded you to be and created you to be, and do your mission. And later on we can talk about this tree, but for now you need to focus on what I have given you as your mission. The serpent comes and says, you can be like God. And here this rebellious person, exemplifying a divine rebellious person, entity that rebels, that is so prideful, that wants to take the place of God and become like God through the wrong means. Think of it this way. When we're talking about these rebellions, the divine rebellions, think of it this way. A king is enthroned upon his in his kingdom, established his rule, and someone comes along, as we mentioned, like Brutus, who kills Julius Caesar. Someone comes along and assassinates that king to replace them. So I'm going to take the place of, I'm going to replace. Now, again, for instance, in David's story, you have the idea that Solomon was David's chosen person to take the throne, but you have the story where others try to position themselves and even begin to enthrone themselves to replace David before he dies. And that causes David then to offer up Solomon to become the king. But there were others trying to be king. Other sons of David who were setting themselves up to be king. Okay? Now notice, how did David become king? When David tried to become king, the most high of humans in Israel, how did David do it? Not by trying to take the throne of Saul early, but letting God do it. In the ancient world, you could only God could establish the government and the king. You could not do that yourself. It had to be by the plan and design of the divine council. So David is saying, when God wants me to be king, and if he wants me to be king, that's fine. According to the prophet, I'm supposed to be king, but it will be by the decree of the divine council and in God's timing. That's when it's going to take place. That is when it's going to happen. That's what we're talking about. So David waits for God to give him the throne. He does not usurp it early, like Adam and Eve tried early to become like God, like this being trying to be like the Most High. So this phrase, Most High, again, let's back up. Verse 13, the mountain of assembly. The mountain of assembly here is referring to divine council. And who's assembled on this mountain? It's the divine beings. The Psalm 82, heavenly court. That's who's assembled. So if it's just one verse, then why do we have the Mount of Assembly? I will make myself like the Most High. I'm going to put myself, be in charge of the council and make the decrees, and everyone's going to follow what I have to say. But instead, you are brought down to Sheol, the underworld, to the far reaches of the pit, so that by mistake, you're a rebellious being, and you tried to usurp the throne, and you failed, and therefore you go to Sheol, the underworld, the place where the dead people are. You die. You die. That's where all the dead people go in the Old Testament. They go to Sheol. They go to the underworld. So instead you die, like Psalm 82. You die. You go to the pit. You go under the earth instead of ruling over the earth. Think cosmologically what they're talking about here. So that's interesting. Again, all of these touch points that we're going to touch upon in this series on the Most High are things that need to be discussed at great length, So the mountain, that could be discussed at great length. The council, we talked a little bit about the divine council. All of these things are touch points for future series that could go on and on and on. But I'm told that there's nothing about the divine council in the Bible, but there's tons of it that we can't get it all, cram it all into a 20-minute session because there's so much. So, Sheol, we have to talk about that. There's so many things we have to talk about here. Mountains and Sheol and all these things. Rebellions, and there's so much that we have got to get into. And there's just only so much time to do it. We hope you've enjoyed the first part of our Most High series and how eye-opening it can be with all the many touch points that we don't know if we'll get to them all, but we'll try to get as many as we can in future episodes. Come back for more of the Most High in part 2. Thank you very much, and God bless you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes and videos to help you with your journey from nomorec.com.